Severe fuel shortage cripples Gaza's emergency response as humanitarian crisis deepens. Poll says that majority of Israelis support Gaza withdrawal deal, doubt leadership on detainee efforts. And Zelensky announces security guarantees framework with allies and calls for a boost in European defense production.
والله العظيم ولا حبة رز، والله العظيم ولا حبة عدس. ما فيش أكل، ما فيش شرب، عندي بنت 2.5 صارت تصدم.
The Palestinian Civil Defense in Gaza has warned that it has received only 20% of its fuel needs over the past month, severely limiting its ability to respond to emergency calls. In a statement, the rescue organization said that the shortage has created a severe inability to meet distress calls amid intense Israeli bombardment and ongoing blockade restrictions. Fuel shortages have also crippled hospitals, water pumps, bakeries and other vital services as Gaza faces a deepening humanitarian crisis, with aid supplies running dangerously low. Munir al-Bursh, Director General of Gaza's Health Ministry, revealed that at least 30% of Palestinians killed in Israeli attacks are children, equating to 28 child deaths every day. Al-Bursh called the figures astonishing and frightening, highlighting the war's devastating impact, which has also left over 65,000 orphans in Gaza. He added that out of 370 malnutrition-related deaths linked to the ongoing famine, 131 are children. He said famine and genocide have been officially declared in Gaza, but the world has stood still watching. Pope Leo met with Israeli President Isaac Herzog at the Vatican, urging a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and the release of detainees held by Hamas. The Pope also reaffirmed support for a two-state solution and called for a swift resumption of peace talks to allow humanitarian aid and uphold international law. The Vatican's unusually detailed statement did not disclose how long the meeting lasted or further specifics. Pope Leo, elected in May, has taken a more cautious approach than his predecessor Francis, but recently intensified calls for an end to the Gaza conflict.
This book also is photographic reproduction.
Public opinion poll conducted by the Israel Democracy Institute revealed that 64.5% of Israelis support a deal that includes the withdrawal of the army from Gaza. The poll also found that 53% believe Israeli leadership is not doing enough to secure the release of the detainees. Families of Israeli detainees called on U.S. President Donald Trump to personally lead negotiations to end the Gaza war and secure the release of detainees held by Hamas. With around detainees still held, including about 20 believed alive, chances for a ceasefire and release deal remain uncertain amid growing protest in Israel demanding an end to the war.
I implore you, gather them all around your table.
Israeli media reported that Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar called on his French counterpart to reconsider the initiative to recognize a Palestinian state. The reports also indicated that a visit by President Emmanuel Macron to Israel is off the table as long as France continues to support the recognition of a Palestinian state. The Israeli occupation army has announced ongoing military operations in Gaza, claiming control over 40% of Gaza City. The forces emphasized their commitment to dismantling Hamas's infrastructure and pursuing militants wherever they are. Efforts to rescue detainees continue as Israel calls up a large number of reserve soldiers to reinforce the campaign. The mission will persist until Hamas is completely eliminated, according to the Israeli media. And for more analysis, we now move to Mona, who is in our newsroom. To you, Mona.
Thank you so much, Hala. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by international relations expert Mr. Mohammed Osman. Good evening to you, Mr. Osman. And let me start by asking you about the public opinion poll in Israel, which has indicated that nearly 65% of Israelis support ending the war in Gaza. Now, what do you have on that?
Thank you for having me, Mona. Of course, when we approach these opinion polls in general, and especially in a very polarized society like Israeli society, we have to approach it very cautiously, because most of these polls are basically politically driven by the institutions that carry them out. However, of course, we cannot deny that there is a growing opposition within Israeli society to the ongoing war and Netanyahu's handling of the war in Gaza, especially on account of the complete disregard the Netanyahu government has for the lives of the remaining detainees in the Gaza Strip, and also because of the mounting casualties of the occupation army, especially the reservists. So, of course, there is a growing discontent within society. However, we cannot really assess or completely conclusively assert that about two-thirds of society are against the ongoing conflict in Gaza, because the Israeli right, on the other hand, carries out polls that show that about 50 and 60% of society support Netanyahu's policies. So we cannot take these opinion polls of face value. And of course, the biggest evidence that supports this assessment of mine is that Netanyahu has been carrying out his policies despite the opposition relentlessly. It seems that he does not really pay much attention to this opposition because it is not that effective. Had it been that two-thirds of Israeli society staunchly oppose Netanyahu's policies, probably Netanyahu's tenure as prime minister would have ended a very long time ago.
Well, let me ask you here, do you think there is any kind of glimpse of hope for a possibility to reaching a ceasefire, to ending the war in Gaza in this upcoming stage or in the near future?
Of course, we cannot rule out any possibility. We might have a ceasefire at some point. However, the current factors and indicators, unfortunately, do not indicate that a ceasefire is imminent or even remotely close at this point. It seems that Israel is pushing forward with its military operation in Gaza City. Reservists are being called to service. Troops are being mobilized on the borders of Gaza. The Israeli army itself is expanding its operations in the vicinity and the suburbs of Gaza City, especially the Al Zaytun district, which has been completely obliterated as far as we know from the evidence, that the aerial evidence and the footage that has been released by the Israeli Army of Occupation. So it seems we are on an escalatory trajectory when it comes to the situation in Gaza, and probably within the next few weeks, within the month of September, we will see the commencement of the main stage of the operation in Gaza City, which will, of course, have dire humanitarian consequences and will cause greater suffering even to the already beleaguered civilian population of Gaza. And as you know, Mona, Israel seeks to displace the remaining population of northern Gaza and Gaza City to central and southern Gaza, which is part of a bigger scheme of depopulating parts of the Gaza Strip with the aim of increasing the security buffer zone, or even annexing parts of the Gaza Strip, which was explicitly stated several times by members of the Israeli government and was even endorsed by the U.S. administration, current U.S. administration, according to Axios. So the chances of a ceasefire are very slim, in my opinion. However, we cannot outrule any possibility.
But there are certain developments that occurred in the Russo-Ukraine war, and there are also some developments in the European stance. And do you think if there was, or Trump was able or succeeded in resolving the Russo-Ukraine conflict, do you think that this would reflect on the Gaza war? He would work also to end the war in Gaza? Any chance of that could happen?
Of course, this is a hypothetical question. However, if we have the point of reference as the Russia-Ukraine war, then it is a very bad point of reference, to be honest, because he is failing miserably in resolving that conflict to begin with. And of course, it's way more complex than the conflict in Gaza when it comes to the power dynamics within it. And if anything, the war in Ukraine is escalating at the moment, and it's completely running out of Trump's control and the Americans' control. So if he's not even succeeding in dealing with two states, in settling that war, it's highly unlikely that he will be able to deliver on the Gaza front, even though it is much easier to deliver on the Gaza front, Mona, because basically Hamas, of course, is a non-state actor, so it doesn't really matter what Hamas says. However, Israel is the main actor here. This is a unilateral war against a civilian population. It's not between two states. And the state party that is conducting this war, that is Israel, is basically an American proxy, and is completely bankrolled and supported by the Americans. So the Americans command the Israelis as the occupying power that has legal responsibility over the Gaza Strip to stop their carnage. They can just do that. But Trump doesn't want to do that. You know why? Mona? Because the Americans are completely complicit with the Israelis, and they are part of this is their agenda, not only the Israeli agenda. We cannot treat them as mutually exclusive, the American agenda in the region and the Israeli agenda in the region, unfortunately. It seems that the United States completely condones and supports and pushes forward and even helps formulate Israel's expansionist, aggressive policies in the region, including, of course, in Gaza. You've seen even with the West Bank. There is a two-state solution conference coming up this month, and the U.S. solution for trying to obstruct this conference is by breaking international law and preventing the legal representatives of the state of Palestine, which is an observer state at the United Nations, from attending and from entering the United States, taking advantage that they host the UN headquarters in New York. They're preventing the Palestinian president for the first time in history to enter the United States. So this is the party we are dealing with when it comes to the United States. They are completely on the side of the Israelis, and they are not really trying to settle anything. All they are trying to do is trying to force the Palestinians to surrender, just like the Israelis.
But there is also the European countries' stance, and it is becoming different than the American one. Do you think there is any chance that the European could put pressures on Israel in a trial to stop this war, or do you think Israel's pressures on European countries would be much more stronger?
Of course, there's a very considerable shift in the European stance on Gaza and on Israel-Palestine, on the Israel-Palestine issue in general. As you can see, the Europeans now are growing much more critical of Israel. More and more European countries are recognizing Palestine, including European powers like France and Britain, and even lesser countries like Belgium and others. So there is a growing mode of solidarity or atmosphere of solidarity within European circles with Palestine and with the Palestinian cause. However, so this in itself causes some pressure on Israel. However, of course, it's not sufficient because the United States provides them with unconditional support on the other hand. The only thing that can counterbalance that is European sanctions on Israel, bearing in mind that the European Union is the largest trade partner of the Israelis. And as Kaya Kallas just said, the foreign relations leader of the European Union, she admitted that there is no consensus among the Europeans on applying sanctions on Israel, and therefore she said that she feels ashamed even that the European Union will not be able to impose any sanctions on Israel. And even those freezing of arms shipments by several countries, including Germany, which is a very staunch ally of Israel, this does not really affect the Israeli war machine, as European arms constitute only about 7% of the arms shipments of the Israeli military. So unfortunately, it is not that effective. These are symbolic moves by the Europeans to try to wash their hands of the carnage that is going on in Gaza, which goes against all of the principles and the notions that they claim to be the champions of, like human rights and the rule of law and all of these other concepts. So unfortunately, unless the Europeans decide to impose sanctions on Israel, I do not see any substantial change on the ground when it comes to Israel's very irresponsible and behavior with impunity with regards to Gaza.
Right, that was international relations expert Mr. Mohammed Osmani. Thank you so much for joining here on Qnews. Now we get back to you, Hala, in our studios. Hala.
Thank you so much, Mona. Moving on with our bulletin, Doctors Without Borders, MSF, has warned that Palestinians in the occupied West Bank face a campaign of forced displacement by Israeli soldiers and settlers, significantly raising the risk of ethnic cleansing. MSF reports that this year its teams have observed deliberate policies aimed at removing Palestinians from their land and preventing the return. Tens of thousands have been displaced by military operations, with homes routinely demolished and settler violence increasing with impunity. Movement restrictions and loss of work permits have made it nearly impossible for Palestinians to sustain themselves, according to the MSF. Canadian MP Jenny Kwan has announced plans to introduce a bill targeting a legal loophole that allows Canadian-made weapons and components to reach Israel through the United States without oversight. Under a U.S.-Canada Defense Pact, arms exporters to the U.S. bypass the risk assessments and transparency rules required by Canada's obligation under the UN Arms Trade Treaty. Kwan, a member of the New Democratic Party, said that the bill would subject all the arms exports to the same scrutiny, regardless of destination. She said while families are being bombed and starved, Canadian-made weapons are still reaching Israel, and this is totally unacceptable. And she was referring to Israel's war on Gaza. Tunisian director Kauthar Benhania's The Voice of Hind Rajab premiered at Venice Film Festival, joined by executive producers Joaquin Phoenix and Rooney Mara. The film tells the true story of 5-year-old Hind Rajab, trapped in a car under Israeli fire in Gaza in 2024. Despite efforts by Palestinian Red Crescent dispatchers, Hind and her relatives died after a delayed ambulance rescue. The emotionally powerful film received a 24-minute standing ovation, the longest at this year's festival, underscoring its impact and urgent message. Meanwhile, fans applauded the arrival of the Voice of Hind Rajab team on the Venice Film Festival red carpet ahead of its premiere. Viewers said that the story needs global attention. Sameh Al-Musawi, a student from Trento, said that it's important to put light on this kind of story. Having this movie in Venice is a plus. Palermo professor Marica Parcia added that the message needs to be heard worldwide and people need to talk about it. The Voice of Hind Rajab is competing for Venice's Golden Lion Award, with the winner announced September the 6th. Cosmetics retailer Lush shuttered all UK stores, factories and its website for 24 hours in a bold gesture of solidarity with Gaza. Shop windows and the homepage displayed the message, "Stop starving Gaza, we are closed in solidarity." The company stated that this action is a response to obstruction of critical humanitarian aid to Gaza. While acknowledging the inconvenience, Lush appealed to the UK government to end arms sales to Israel and urgently addresses the humanitarian crisis. Lush also plans to reintroduce its watermelon slice soap, their most successful fundraising product to date, with the proceeds going towards medical aid and prosthetic support for Gazans.
المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
UNIFIL has condemned Israeli drones dropping 4 grenades near UN peacekeepers clearing roadblocks in southern Lebanon. UNIFIL stressed Israel was informed beforehand of the operation. UN Secretary General Guterres called the incident completely unacceptable and urged all the parties to ensure peacekeeper safety. 1 grenade landed within 20 meters of personnel, but no injuries were reported. UNIFIL's mission in Lebanon has been extended through 2026.
Lebanon said this is one of the most serious attacks on UNIFIL personnel and assets since the cessation of hostilities.
Meanwhile, Lebanon has condemned the Israeli attack on UNIFIL forces in which drones dropped bombs near the town of Marwahin in southern Lebanon. The Lebanese presidency stated that President Joseph Aoun held a phone call with UNIFIL Commander General Diadato Abaganda and conveyed Lebanon's condemnation of the attack. It was noted that this incident is the most serious since the ceasefire agreement last November and that it occurred less than a week after the UN Security Council extended UNIFIL's mandate until the end of 2027.
قرر مجلس وزراء ما يلي. أولا
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Kiev and its allies have reached an understanding on a general framework for security guarantees. He added that each contributing country is preparing the necessary documents. Speaking in Paris, Zelensky emphasized that a strong Ukrainian military will be key to these commitments and urged European defense firms to increase production to full capacity.
Це можливості нашої армії, це і зброя, і фінансування, і тренування, і виробництво зброї.
French President Emmanuel Macron announced that U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine will be finalized in the coming days following a call with U.S. President Donald Trump. Macron said that the U.S. has been engaged at every stage and expressed clear willingness to participate in the security arrangements planned for Ukraine. Leaders from Europe, Australia, Japan, and Canada attended the Coalition of the Willing Summit, either in person or via video link, with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff also present. The talks aim to solidify commitments to Kiev's security in the event of a peace deal with Russia.
Nous avons, à l'issue de ce sommet, décidé de lancer maintenant les travaux politiques et juridiques pour décliner ces garanties de sécurité.
The news site Axios revealed that U.S. President Donald Trump has become increasingly frustrated with the Ukraine issue due to his inability to bring together Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump held a virtual meeting with Zelensky and a group of European leaders to discuss the stalled diplomatic efforts to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. The site explained that the call took place amid growing frustration on Trump's part over his failure to arrange a meeting between Zelensky and Putin or achieve any tangible progress. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has declared a new Ebola outbreak in Kasai province with 28 suspected cases and 15 deaths, including 4 health workers. The outbreak, confirmed as Ebola Zaire, is centered in Bolapi and Mweka health zones. The WHO and national teams have deployed emergency response staff and 2 tons of medical supplies to the remote region. 2,000 doses of the Ervebo vaccine are ready to be deployed from Kinshasa to protect contacts and health workers. This marks Congo's 16th Ebola outbreak since 1976. Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met in Beijing, marking their first meeting in 6 years. Xi expressed his pleasure in seeing Kim again, recalling his 2019 state visit to North Korea and emphasizing the close family-like bond between the two nations. Kim responded emotionally, praising China's significant development and reaffirming the unchanging and deep friendship between their peoples despite global changes. China's foreign ministry has firmly opposed EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas's comments, labeling the recent military parade featuring China, Russia, Iran and North Korea as an autocratic alliance challenging the international order. The spokesperson Guo Jiakun criticized Kallas's statement as full of ideological bias without basic historical facts, responding during a daily news briefing in Beijing. Kallas made the remarks in Brussels on Wednesday, warning the alliance sought a fast track to a new world order. The death toll from the Lisbon railway crash climbed to 17 after 2 more victims died in hospital. Authorities did not reveal the identities or nationalities of the deceased, but confirmed some were foreign nationals. Following the accident, the city's remaining 2 functional lines were temporarily closed for safety inspections. The crash occurred when the hollow cable snapped on the steep 265-meter stop, causing the descending car to lose braking, derail, and smash into a building near the track's bottom. The Australian government has announced proposed Australian $475 million compensation payout to victims of the illegal robo-debt welfare recovery program, potentially the largest class action settlement in Australian history. Robo-debt, active from 2016 to 2019, used faulty automated algorithms to wrongly claim debts from hundreds of thousands of welfare recipients before being ruled illegal by the courts. The program caused severe financial harm and was linked to multiple suicides, with legal costs including payout could reach $548 million, bringing total government compensation related to robo-debt to $2.4 billion Australian dollars.
Hundreds of thousands of Australians afflicted by the robo-debt scandal. Today, they know that their voices have been heard. Today is also a day of warning to governments and bureaucrats at all levels.
The UN is delivering rescue teams, food and aid to survivors of a devastating landslide in Sudan's remote Mara Mountains, where at least 370 people have died. Luca Renda, acting UN resident and humanitarian coordinator in Sudan, said that a clearer assessment of the situation will emerge soon. The armed group controlling the area initially estimated the death toll could be as high as 1,000. So far, 9 bodies have been recovered by local rescue teams. Only 1 survivor has been reported. A wildfire has burned more than 608,000 acres in Tulameen County, Northern California, after igniting near the Don Pedro Overlook Trail and Old Pedro Road. Video released by the Tulameen County Sheriff's Office showed flames advancing near roads with emergency vehicles deployed near the fire line. CAL FIRE's Tulameen Calvary's unit suspects that lightning is the cause of the blaze. Efforts to contain the fire are still ongoing. Italian fashion icon Giorgio Armani has passed away in Milan at the age of 91. A public funeral chamber will be held in the city on Saturday and Sunday, with a private funeral to follow at a later date. Armani, often hailed as Re Giorgio, was a towering figure in global fashion, blending elegant Italian design with sharp business acumen. His fashion house generates around 2.3 billion euros annually. He had been unwell for some time and missed his first ever runway show during Milan Men's Fashion Week in June. Known for his meticulous attention to details, Armani personally oversaw everything from advertising campaigns to model styling, cementing his legacy as one of fashion's most hands-on and influential visionaries. And that brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here is what we have been covering. Severe fuel shortage cripples Gaza's emergency response as humanitarian crisis deepens. Paul says that majority of Israelis support Gaza withdrawal deal and doubt leadership on detainee efforts. Zelensky announces security guarantees framework with allies and calls for boost in European defense production. And this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to always stay informed. My name is Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for joining us.